All right.
Keeping
This
the
is
banking
PG.
business
Can you
good, I
hear me?
guess.
Yes, sir. I can hear you, Mr. Peoples.
Okay, good.
So, Mr. Brown, how are things down in your neighborhood? Pretty good?
Well, it's doing pretty good. I'd say we're all doing pretty fair down here. How about you up north?
You did all right, except we had a pretty good little frost this morning. But,
Well, we didn't have a frost here. My goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Afternoon, everyone. This is Steve.
Hey, Steve.
I'm kind of out in a busy area, so I'm going to keep my phone on mute as much as I can.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Holly.
Hello, how are you all?
Fine, thank you. Hi, Barry. How you doing?
Doing well today. How about you?
Good. How's your hand?
Oh, thanks for asking. It's good.
Good deal.
Good. I don't want to have
Hey, I just talked to your kinfolk yesterday.
I'm sorry?
They're doing well. I just talked to your kinfolk yesterday. They're doing well.
Well, good. Good. Other than frost, I'm assuming, because I just heard you say that Maysville got frost.
Yeah, we had a little frost this morning.
Yeah, it's too late in the year for frost. I don't like
Yeah.
that.
All right, so I think we're just waiting on a couple more people, but you know, it's up to you, Mr. Chairman, if you want to get started.
Let's give them another minute.
Okay.
How are you, Winston?
I'm fine. Can you see me, Mike?
I sure can.
Okay, I've got my screen set up here. I only see the people that are speaking, and even when I'm speaking, it doesn't show me. So I'm just wondering for sure whether I was visible or not.
Yeah.
But aside from the frost this morning, it's a beautiful day.
Yeah, it is. It's supposed to warm up, so I'm ready for it, personally.
July, we'll all be thinking it needs to be April and May again.
Yeah. But the old timers used to say frost or thunder in February, frost in May. So
right.
May have another one to go.
I've been to at least one Derby in the last 30 years in which it snowed on Derby Day. So.
Yes.
1990.
Yes.
I went to that Derby. That's the first one I ever went to, and I thought to myself, it's going to be the last one because it was really snowy.
Neil and I went. I'm sorry. Neil and I went to the 100th, and he swore he'd go to the 200th. If he ever got out of there, he said, "I'll just go to the 200th, Gail. We won't be going back."
They had 16 horses in the race that day, and I bet on 15 of them. And guess which one won?
Oh no!
Bet on.
Right. And I don't think he ever won a race after that. So anyway, just my luck. So Sam, what about you? You bet.
So the only person we're waiting on is Marilyn Mason. We did hear from her that she was going to be joining, so we can go ahead and get started if you'd like.
Okay. All right. Well, let's call the meeting to order. And Sam, can you confirm a quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum, and the press has been notified.
Okay. Also, consideration of the minutes of last meeting held February 29th.
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Okay, Terry Helton, you want to talk about the final resolution for Garden Place Apartments?
Yes. So today I'm going to present to you the final resolution for Garden Place Apartments. KHC provides conduit financing for development of multifamily projects. And under this program, the Tax Exempt Bonding Authority, controlled by KHC, is to provide the developer to be financed on a tax exempt bond borrowing basis. And along with 4% low-income housing tax credits, which provides equity to this particular program, to the projects. KHC is just the issuer of the bonds in name only. They are not a liability of KHC nor a corporate asset. Garden Place Apartments is a project that was granted inducement resolution in October of 2023 for a bond authority in the amount of $5 million. And this final resolution is also for $5 million. The project involves the acquisition and new construction of 30 units located at 100 Tyler Lane in Irvine, Kentucky. And they will serve 22 elderly households at or below 30% AMI and 8 elderly households at or below 60% AMI, and they are all 1-bedroom units. The development team is listed as follows, and KHC staff recommends approval by the Board of Directors of Kentucky Housing Corporation of this final resolution for the issuance of bonds for Garden Place Apartments.
Any members have any questions of Terry in regard to this project? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we approve.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion to have a second and have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Terry, for your hard work on this project.
Thank you all.
Okay, Tracy Thurston, authorization to enter into a personal service contract with BLX Group LLC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the board. Sam, I think you stopped sharing.
Apologies.
Yeah. I've got a handful of personal service contracts to seeking authorization on this afternoon, and we'll start with the BLX Group. This is authorization to enter into personal service contract with BLX Group LLC for arbitrage rebate calculation services. KHC requires services to perform arbitrage rebate calculation services on our non-purpose investments. The IRS code requires ongoing 5-year period calculations to determine if there's any excess earnings in excess of the yield on a bond series that would be required to be addressed or rebated to the U.S. Treasuries. Following request for proposals, 3 responses were received by the corporation, and KHC selected BLX to provide these services. We have the option to renew the contract for 2 consecutive years following the initial contract. Staff recommends approval by the board, authorizing us to enter into a personal service contract with BLX Group for arbitrage rebate services for fiscal year 2025 in an amount not to exceed $1,500.
Okay, any members have any questions of Tracy in regard to this personal service contract?
Yeah, who held it before?
BLX has been our most recent as well.
Okay.
There was 2 other responses, Dinsmore, Scholl, and Kutak. We work with them in other capacities, but BLX, the scoring committee recommended BLX for the contract.
And so there's no limitation by the federal government on how many years in a row you can hire the same firm?
No, not for this. There's not a lot of them out there that do these types of services. So as far as I'm aware, there isn't, no.
Okay, sometimes there is,
Yeah.
like in audits.
Yeah.
I move we accept it if nobody else has something to say.
All right, so we have a motion to accept it. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Okay, Tracy, you want to talk about personal service contract with Sterl and Reddy?
Yes, this is an authorization to enter into a personal service contracts with Sterling Reddick, PLLC, and Septimus Taylor, PSC, for legal services for our legal department, for our loan servicing department. KHC requests authorization to enter into a personal service contract with these 2 firms for the fiscal year 2025 for legal representation in foreclosure and bankruptcy proceedings. Following request for a proposal, KHC received 3 responses and selected these 2 firms for legal representation. KHC has the option to renew the contracts for 2 consecutive years following the original solicitation and evaluation process. We are recommending approval by the board for a resolution authorizing the corporation to enter into a personal service contract for legal representation in foreclosure and bankruptcy proceedings with Sterling Reddick in an amount not to exceed $1.2 million. and Septimus Taylor in an amount not to exceed $750,000 for fiscal year end 2025. Just to note, a majority of these funds are reimbursed through our insuring agencies, and if we used inside legal staff, we would not be eligible for reimbursement. That's why we outsource this. And staff recommends approval.
Okay, any members have any questions of Tracy in regard to this contract?
I do with all of them. I'm fine with this, but I'm just saying, is one of the things that we look at is female or minority, either ownership or ensuring that their staffing, that they are following fair staffing. I'm not going to object to this. Don't worry. I'm just asking if that's one of the criteria we look at.
As part of the RFP, I think we only go as far as looking to see if they're local to Kentucky, if they have offices in Kentucky. I don't believe there were points awarded for like Meaty Weedy or anything like that.
Just a thought.
Thank you. Any other members have any questions of Tracy? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Steve will make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Steve. Do I have a second?
Sorry.
Have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Okay, Tracy, you're on a roll. So authorization to enter into a contract with Kentuckiana Property Preservations.
Yeah, so this is for our preservation services for our default portfolio in single family. Pursuant to terms of FHA, rural housing, VA, and Fannie Mae insurance, we are required to perform certain preservation and/or inspection services on single-family loans when a property is vacant, delinquent, or in foreclosure. Securing contracts with these property preservation companies will allow our servicing department to respond quickly to reports of vacancies, maintain proper inspection, lawn maintenance, and winterization schedules, and order repairs to properties, thereby preserving the value of the property and protecting the interests of the corporation. We are reimbursed for these through insurer claims as well, and the majority of funds are paid to the property preservation companies. Following request for our RFP, KHC had 3 responses. They are all the folks we are recommending here today. We selected Kentuckiana Property Preservation, Paid to Buy Realty, and Wolverine Real Estate Services. We'll have the option to renew the contract for 2 consecutive years following the initial term. KHC staff recommends approval by the board for a resolution authorizing us to enter into a contract with Kentuckiana Property Preservation in an amount not to exceed $800,000, Paid to Buy Realty in an amount not to exceed $250,000, and Wolverine Real Estate Services in an amount not to exceed $800,000 for fiscal year 2025.
So any members have any questions of Tracy in regard to these contracts? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we adopt.
So moved, Gail.
Okay, have a motion by Gail. Do I have a second?
Beverly.
And a second by Beverly. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you all.
All right, Sam, you have a personal service contract with Ballas for investment advisor services. You want
Yes,
to talk
thank
about
you.
it, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a request for authorization to enter into a personal service contract with Ballast Inc. for investor advisor services. So Kentucky Housing Corporation is the sponsor of a 401A defined contribution plan, and the KHC executive team serve as the trustees for the plan. And in that capacity, we require investment advice from properly licensed investment advisors. In 2024, earlier this year, KHC issued an RFP for investor advisory services, and we only received 1 response. We evaluated the response and selected Ballast Inc. KHC has the option to renew this personal service contract for 2 additional consecutive years. KHC staff recommend approval by the board of directors of a resolution authorizing KHC to enter into a personal service contract with Ballast Inc. in an amount not to exceed $16,000 for fiscal year 2024.
Any members have any questions of Sam in regard to this? So If not, I'll entertain a motion that we adopt Ballas.
Motion.
All right, a motion by Mr. Peoples. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're down to informational items, and I think this is where I need to turn it over to Winston. I think you're going to introduce Shay. Winston, is that correct?
I am, Mike. As is indicated on the agenda, and I think as you've just indicated, Shay Rabo is going to address us today concerning trends in Kentucky homelessness. She's going to give us some preliminary results from the point-in-time count that is conducted, I think, in January or February of each year. That count was conducted, and she has the preliminary results. They're preliminary because they haven't been reported to HUD. And then she's going to tell us a bit about the various programs that Kentucky Housing Corporation actually administers as it relates to the homeless population. Shay, are you there, and can you hear me?
I'm here.
Great.
Thank you so much for having me today, everybody. As Winston said, I'm Shay Raybold. I am in KHC's Housing Contract Administration Department, and part of our role is to help oversee the annual point-in-time count. And so that is what I will start my presentation with today, a little background on the point-in-time count. You may hear us or have heard us refer to this before as the K count. If you have heard us talk about the K count, that's the same thing as the point-in-time count or the PIT count. And the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development requires communities to conduct a point-in-time count or a PIT count of people experiencing homelessness at least once every other year on one night during the last 10 days of January. And so across the country, there are point-in-time counts happening in all communities at one night during the last 10 days of January. Point-in-time counts are organized, and the findings are reported to HUD by what are called continuums of care, or COCs. And I'm sure you guys have heard KHC talk about our continuum of care program before, but I'll just tell you a little bit that in order for communities to apply for the continuum of care program funding, or the COC funding, they have to form what's called a COC, or a continuum of care. And there's over 400 of those nationally, 3 COCs in Kentucky. So you have the Lexington COC, the Louisville COC, and then what's called the Balance of State COC. And Kentucky Housing oversees the Balance of State COC, which is the 118 counties outside of Fayette and Jefferson. And so each January, the 3 COCs each conduct our own point-in-time counts. And as Winston mentioned, but I just want to reiterate that the numbers that I will be sharing in this presentation today are still in draft form. They may be modified just a tiny bit, but nothing significant, less than 10 people or so, one way or the other, based on some last minute fine tuning. But they're not ready for publication yet, but we are comfortable sharing them with you today. So Sam, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the point-in-time count helps us determine the estimated number of people experiencing what's called literal homelessness on any given night in Kentucky. Think of it as a snapshot of when you would say on any given night, this many people are experiencing literal homelessness. And what do we mean by literal homelessness? What we're talking about are people that you might more stereotypically think of as experiencing homelessness. So people who are sleeping outside or in other places not meant for regular human habitation, such as an abandoned building or their car, as well as people who are being served in emergency shelters and transitional housing programs that are specifically for people experiencing homelessness. And I wanted to make one other point I forgot to say. For those of you guys who work mostly in Louisville, they refer to their point in time count as, they used to call it the street count. They're not now calling it the point in time count. In Lexington, it's the Lex count. And for the balance estate, it's the K count. So just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. That's why I'm using the term point in time, just so we're all kind of knowing what we're talking about here. So next slide, please. So here are the numbers for 2024. If we're looking at all 3 COCs, so all 120 counties that reported data, we found 5,218 individuals who were either sleeping outside or in another place not meant for human habitation, an emergency shelter, or a transitional housing project for people experiencing homelessness. The majority of those were in the balance of state, followed by Louisville with the second highest, and then Lexington. Next slide. And so what we're looking at on this slide is the total number from the point in time counts all the way back to 2019. And I just want to point out that 2021, you'll see an asterisk by that. In 2021, due to the pandemic, the balance estate and Lexington did not conduct an unsheltered count. So the number for 2021 is just those that are in shelter. So you can kind of, plus Louisville's unsheltered population. I would recommend just not looking at 2021 because it's so different. But you will see that there has been a continual increase, unfortunately, in the number of people experiencing homelessness across the state. 2023 to 2024, this represents about a 9.5% increase. That is less than the increase from the previous 2 years, but still going up. And just for a little bit of perspective, as I noted, the data for 2024 nationally has not been submitted to HUD, and it'll take quite a while for it to be published. But between 2022 and 2023 nationally, there was about a 12% increase. But 2023 to 2024 in Kentucky, we're looking at about a 9.5% increase. Next slide, please.
Okay, can I ask, is there any correlation between the tornadoes in Western Kentucky and the flooding in Eastern Kentucky in regard to that increase?
That's an excellent question. And we're still one of the questions that we ask people is, what is the reason for their current homelessness? And so we're still evaluating that information, but we have not found actually a very large number of people that self-reported natural disaster, either flood or tornado or something else, but those primarily. Very few people actually that we identified during this year's count reported their cause of homelessness being from the disaster. But that's a good question and something that we were trying to look into.
It's Kathy. What about the cessation of payments to families which have childhood poverty, and the cessation of rent assistance?
Right. So, and I'm assuming you're probably referring to assistance that was available because of the pandemic. Right. So there's lots of different programs that came about because of the pandemic, and they were extremely helpful. Some of those for people who were at risk of experiencing homelessness or who were experiencing homelessness previously, those are just now starting to fall off. So we haven't seen a huge influx yet of people who fall into that category. As I mentioned, one of the questions we ask people is the reason for their homelessness. And I don't have the data today. I'll be happy to make sure it's available, either come back or share it with you guys otherwise. Kind of the breakdown of what people say, but most people are reporting not having enough money to pay rent, of course. Some are saying eviction. I know I'm not giving like actual percentages here, but not being able to pay rent and or eviction are the top reasons why people are experiencing homelessness. So I don't have the exact answer, but I think we're going to see that in the coming year more so than over the past year and in January, just because of the timing of when things rolled off.
And I hope you haven't covered. I was looking up the Kentucky statute that criminalizes sleeping outside. So I was wondering, of those 5,000 people, how many of them will be in prison? And if they're in prison for being homeless, will you count them as homeless next year?
Okay, excellent question. Do you mind if I hold that thought for 2 more slides? Because
Yeah.
I've got the
fine.
number.
I'm holding it because I'm also going to ask how many of the people are minors.
Okay, so thank you. And those are excellent questions. And we could speak for hours about all of this. So I'm very excited. Those of y'all who know me on the call know that I like geek out about this. So this is great. Just real quick, let's go through emergency shelter, if you don't mind. This again is year over year back to 2019, showing Lexington, Louisville, and balance of state. You could look at lots of different things here. 2021, you see a big dip, and that is not need-based. That is COVID precaution-based, where a lot of shelters either closed or cut in half or more how many people they could serve. But if you're looking at just kind of year over year, 23 to 24, there was actually a reduction in Lexington a little bit of an increase in Louisville, and an increase in balance of state. Next slide, please. I think our transitional housing real quick here. We don't have very many transitional housing beds for people experiencing homelessness left anymore. Most of the HUD funding goes to permanent housing, permanent supportive housing, and rapid rehousing. There's been kind of a philosophical shift over the past 10 years, so a lot more money into permanent housing. But still, you'll see, pretty much very high occupancies of the beds that we do have. But if you could get to the next slide, please. And this is to Kathy's question about unsheltered homelessness. So again, back to 2019, with 2021, there not being an unsheltered count in Lexington or the balance of state. But you can see very substantial increases over just the past 5 or 6 years across the entire state. And for 2024, the largest increase, both percentage-wise and number-wise, was in the balance of state. The vast majority of those counties are rural counties. So there are large numbers in Louisville, of course, and Lexington has smaller, relatively speaking, numbers, but still a large number. But the reason I point that out is we are talking about places, yes, we are talking about Bowling Green and Covington and Owensboro and Paducah and places like that. But actually, one of the highest, just as an example, one of the highest levels of unsheltered homelessness is actually in Knox County in southeastern Kentucky. Well over 100 people for the past several years have been found unsheltered on our point in time count nights. And several other of these numbers in the balance of state of the 1,000 that were found this year are in rural counties. And most of these counties actually do not have emergency shelters. So the reason I point that out is to try to respond to the question that Kathy was talking about, which was House Bill 5, which passed, was vetoed, and then the veto was overridden, the Safer Kentucky Act, which will make it against the law to sleep outside. Street camping is the terminology that's used in the bill, I believe. And it's against the law to sleep outside if there's not available shelter. I think there's some nuances, and of course you might be following the Supreme Court case out of Oregon that is covering the same thing. But theoretically, on any given night, what this is saying is that well over 1,000 people in Kentucky could be fined or arrested and put in jail for sleeping outside. So I could go on about that, but Kathy, do you have any more specific questions about that?
No, but at some point I would love to see how county by county it matches with the gap analysis that was just so excellently presented.
Yes.
At some point, one thing at a time, right?
I hear you. I know. I'm going actually to speak in Eastern Kentucky tomorrow, and I'm trying to be armed with both point in time and the gap analysis data to talk about it together. So,
Shay, I got a quick question for you.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned that Lexington has more homelessness than Louisville, which is an anomaly, or not an anomaly, it's just weird. Is it because Lexington has more shelter that people gravitate to Lexington, or what do you see there in a correlation? Because
I apologize. I may have misspoke if I said Lexington had more than Louisville.
Okay, I might have misunderstood that. I was thinking that Lexington had about 1,600 in homeless, and I might have got this backwards. And Louisville had about 800 in the point in time count. Did I get it backwards?
I think, I believe let's scroll up. Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. There we go. Yes. So Lexington has 800.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Both of them are blue, so I got it kind of right.
That's right.
So
I probably should have made it like Louisville red and UK blue. That would have been more helpful.
That's right. That might be why I got it confused.
Yeah. Okay, so now for the rest of the data, I want to just make sure everybody is clear that I'm only going to be talking about balance of state data and not Lexington and Louisville. And the reason why is it just happens that the timing of this presentation, I had hoped that we would all have our data ready to submit to HUD, but there's been some technical issues. And so therefore I only have KHC's data, which is the balance of state, for more demographic information. But the full state data will be made available soon. But so for the next several slides, we're just looking at balance of state. So this is for just 2024. It mirrors 2023. And prior to 2023, the data, we only collected it by being under 18 to 24, and 25 or older. So just for the past 2 years have we been collecting and reporting it based on these brackets. But what you'll see is obviously we do have quite a few people who are under 18. The majority or the highest number is going to be in your mid-range, about 35 to 44. But then when you look at 55 and older, that if you combine those two together, it goes up over 400 as well, just like those under 18, which presents a whole host of other challenges for communities to address when people are aging in addition to experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So this is household breakdown, regardless of whether they're unsheltered or sheltered. The majority of folks are in what we call households without children. And so that could be one or more adult identifying together as a household. A little less than 10% are households with children, and then less than 1% are households where the person is under 18.
Just to make sure,
Yep.
the number you're using is number of households, because children are certainly more than 10%
Yes.
of the number of people who are, and I couldn't do the math that quickly, but what, 12%
That sounds about right. I don't have
of the people who are homeless?
Yes. Children. That's correct.
So more than 1 in 10 homeless people are children.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes, you get the gold star for math today. But yes, that is correct. What we're looking at here is households, and it's just another way to kind of look at it. And I'll kind of tell you why in a couple slides why it can be important to look at household type. Or I'll just go ahead and tell you now. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Now we're going to look at unsheltered household breakdown. The vast majority of people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the Balance Estate are households without children, followed by households with children, and those that are minors. And the reason I like to show this data is because when we're comparing it to available emergency shelters, a lot of times communities will want to have shelters that are for families with children. And we absolutely must have shelters and housing assistance programs for households with children. Just like Kathy mentioned or noted, there are over 400 on any given night kids in the Balance Estate who are experiencing homelessness. Most of those were in shelters. But if you look at those that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, the majority of them are not in families. And so we don't have as many shelters most of our housing programs are available for people regardless of household type. But most of the shelters in Kentucky are for families. And so there's a disconnect in many communities between who's experiencing unsheltered homelessness and what resource might be available. So thinking back to House Bill 5, even if you're doing an analysis of where shelters are available, you have to further look at who does the shelter serve. And in most cases, it's women or it's families with children or women with children. Next slide, please.
I'll just ask, of those, and I agree, okay, I agree. Although I do think we don't count the kids who are placed with the aunt
100%.
Wherever, so that there's a lot more children who are not in their family, who I think of as homeless, that are not counted at all because they're not in shelter with their family. They've been, because kids are the last people even though kids are the last people we throw into the street, we still throw a lot of kids in the street. But I do want to point that out. But of this 90s, what percent are you even able to determine are people with a disability? Might be like 25%.
So a little bit later, I do have some percentages of self-reported disability. I'll just go ahead, but it's limited in, you can go ahead and scroll down to it, one more down, right here. So it's obvious that what I have on the slide is not all disabilities, but I do have adults with serious mental illness, 17%, adults with substance use disorder, 13%. Chronically homeless counts how long you've been homeless, so over a year or more, plus a disability that causes you not to be able to keep housing or a job. And so I would say, and then there's other disabilities, of course, physical, developmental, etc. I would say that your guess of about 25% is probably a good guess. And the reason, I hate to even call it a guess, but a good assumption. The reason I say that is this information is self-reported. And so there are people who might not be disclosing disabilities. If we go up a slide or two, I think I had just.
Can I ask a question, please?
Of course.
So when they don't self-report, the data that you receive, is that a survey that is conducted by you, or you collected somewhere else?
Thank you for asking that question, and I should have actually explained how this was conducted. So the way the point in time count is conducted is a survey. It's a one-on-one survey that is conducted by volunteers and service providers at the local level. So Kentucky Housing Corporation, we do have staff who volunteer and go help local communities. But most of the time, it's your Salvation Armies and community action agencies.
So would that be somebody like KIPTA?
KIPTA, like the ad?
Yeah.
KIPTA, I'm not sure if the ad, like the actual development district, has participated, but we do have Volunteers of America is an organization that is in the KIPTA area that has typically conducted the count in the KIPTA counties. And then we have shelters, and there's actually not a whole lot of service providers in the KIPTA area serving people experiencing homelessness, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
But it is a one-on-one survey where they're asked, do you have such and such disability? And if they say yes, then the follow-up question is whether or not it keeps them from being able to hold a job or housing. But a lot of times people don't disclose that information. Let's see, one more slide down, I think, here. So gender, again, this is just unsheltered, and we can slice the data in lots of different ways, but just looking at unsheltered, the majority of which were adults, the majority identify as being a man, and then followed by women, and then about 1% identified as transgender, non-binary, or more than one gender. And again, this is self-reported gender. And we also have race and ethnicity, though I did not have the information in a way that I felt like it was accurate yet to report. But I'll tell you that what we have seen, because I think you'll probably be interested, is, the majority of people in Kentucky experiencing homelessness are white. The majority of people in Kentucky identify as white. But we have seen a disproportionate number of people of color, particularly those that are African American or Black, experiencing homelessness. So once we have those numbers available, I would not be surprised if we saw that again in 2024. And then just to point out again, we talked about serious mental illness and adults with substance use disorder. The good news is that unfortunately, while we do have veterans who are experiencing homelessness, it is about 6%. It's been about that number for percentage for several years, people coming in and out of homelessness. Unaccompanied youth are under the age of 24 without a parent, and most of them that we are able to find are 18 to 24. So about 162, and then parenting youth are under 25 with a child in their care. So these are special populations that we are required to report to HUD. One of the reasons I wanted to point out the first 3 bullet points, chronic homelessness, again, that requires, it's a HUD definition that requires that you do have a disability. And then the serious mental illness and substance use disorder. While these percentages might be a little low, I do not think, just based on the data that we've seen over the years, that they're substantially low. We do know that many people who experience homelessness do have disabilities, but it's not, the data does not show that the majority of people, or anywhere near the majority of people, are suffering from substance use or mental illness, though many are. But the reason I want to point out these numbers is because in the public dialogue about people experiencing homelessness, there's an assumption very often that they must have a substance use disorder, they must have a mental illness. And while that's true, the overwhelming majority of people we find are homeless because they can't afford housing. And we all know people who have substance use disorders who are housed, and mental illnesses that are housed. And while it could cause homelessness, it actually could get worse if you are homeless. But just want to point out what the data is showing for what it's worth. And of course, it spurs more questions. But that's what I have as far as the point in time count. I'm happy to answer any other questions about the data here or things you're interested in.
This is Steve. Hi, this is Steve. I'm sorry, I forget your first name.
Oh, Shay, but yeah, that's fine.
Shay.
You can call me whatever.
Okay. And I don't want to open a can of worms or get into something that's maybe not appropriate for this venue, but we could talk offline. But first of all, in Northern Kentucky, of course, we have Campbell, Kenton, and Boone. Kenton, which is where Covington is and where most of the social services are housed, Covington has a emergency shelter.
Right.
It's run by Kim
Webb.
Webb, yes, thank you. She found out that I was on the board, and about a month or so ago asked to have coffee with me. And her concern is that either her data was not being incorporated, or she felt as though it wasn't being incorporated. And I guess my first question is when you say collecting data from the counties, are you collecting the data from a county department, or does it come in directly from the shelters themselves?
Okay, and that's an excellent question. So for the point in time count, the data comes specifically and only from people, directly from people who are experiencing homelessness. Well, I should clarify what I mean by that. That's not true. I misstated. For the point in time count, if people are not using what is called the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, which KHC oversees, then they do a one-on-one survey. And this is getting really in the weeds here, but we actually have people submit it through an online application, like answer the questions, and it is submitted to us that way. So unsheltered surveys, people sleeping outside, are done one-on-one surveys. In shelters, including the emergency shelter of Northern Kentucky, where that's the name of it, where Kim works, they fill out surveys and submit it through the app. So we are including Kim's data in the point in time count. For shelters that are using HMIS, Homeless Management Information System, they're entering client level data every day about people sleeping in their shelters. And so KHC pulls that information out of HMIS. So it is provided by the shelter, self-reported information from the person experiencing homelessness. And when I say counties, so we're not going to the county governments, we're not getting the data from the school system, which is a whole nother issue. We're getting data from the shelters directly, either through data they're submitting through HMIS or through the app, or for unsheltered, the one-on-one surveys. For Kim, this is very technical, but just for everyone's benefit, they are entering data in an HMIS system, but it's one that is overseen by the Cincinnati COC. It's a different software system, and they don't speak to the same system we use. So what she's probably referring to is like her data on a regular basis is not part of the data KHC has access to. But for point in time count data, we definitely are including their data, which is very important. And we're having a continual conversation with them about figuring out how to get their data in our system. It's behind the scenes weed stuff, but I'd be happy to talk about it more with you guys because they're an important partner.
Yeah, I do recall she mentioned that she was on the Cincinnati system, and I guess I could see where the two systems may not talk to each other, but wouldn't it just be an easy fix for her to just get on the system that KHC manages?
That is our opinion.
Okay.
I mean, we would prefer for her to use our system. There must be benefits that she has. I'm not sure. I can't recall why she's choosing to use the Cincinnati system.
Okay.
But there's a cost associated with importing the data between vendors, which would be really substantial. So that's not a likely option.
Okay.
But you do raise a good point about kind of where we're getting the data from, because one of the benefits of the point in time that happens each year, while it has downsides to it, that's not perfect, it is the one opportunity that we have to capture data from the shelters that do not use HMIS. And we have over 70 shelters, including those that are just seasonal, just open during the winter months. And less than half of those get funding through HUD that's passed through KHC. And so less than half are required to be using this HMIS system I've talked about. So the point in time allows us to get information about unsheltered homelessness and shelters that don't normally give us their data, basically, because they're not required to through various funding sources.
What one thought this could be rhetorical, but the three counties again are included in the Hamilton County MSA, Hamilton County being Cincinnati. I wonder if because of that might be the reason she's on that system.
I don't want to speak for Kim, but I don't think that's the reason.
Okay. But bottom line is this train runs through your station. It sounds like aware of Kim's concerns, and it sounds like there have been some steps taken to try to rectify it, but there may be some resistance to change on her end that has maybe put us at a standstill. Is that a fair way to?
It's very interesting that you brought this up, because I was on a meeting with Kim this morning, the Kentucky Interagency Council on Homelessness, and she actually emailed me just today to bring this conversation up again about finding ways that we can get their data into our system. And I think her preference would be to do an import, which is like technical term, but that is would cost tens of thousands of dollars, most likely. But I am very aware, my department is very aware of the situation, and are more than happy to try to work with Kim to find a resolution.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's been very helpful, and thank you, the rest of the committee, for bearing with us during this somewhat one-on-one conversation. That's all I have.
Thank you, Steve, for bringing it up.
You're welcome.
Okay. So I do have some.
I can say that I thought it was fascinating about ad districts, because Kip does it in Indiana and here, and HUD regional areas, how these jurisdictional things sometimes work very well and sometimes not so well.
That is true. And I think Kentucky Balance Estate, which incorporates all of the ad districts, including Bluegrass, which includes Lexington, but we actually have organized the way we prioritize housing resources based on ad districts. And we call them local prioritization communities, but they mirror the footprint of the ads. And the reason we did that is because those counties are so used to working together already anyway. And so as new funding comes online for rental assistance or street outreach or whatever it is, it used to be that individual agencies would go after the funding and serve just one county. But now, mainly because KHC is pushing people in this direction, but I think it's working. But we basically are requiring people to serve, most of the time, if the funding's enough, a full ad district, so that people don't have to be in that one county to access the housing. They can be in multiple ones, but that's a whole other presentation. And there's lots of mayors and county judge executives and things to consider, but it's a fun challenge. I do have just a few more things I can talk about, but I'm happy to go back to the data if anybody thinks of any questions. So I'll just keep going here. I could have made a lot of different slides, but for the sake of time, I just made one that I am going to talk about some of the programs that we have at KHC that are focused specifically on people experiencing homelessness. And when I say that, it can include people who are at risk of homelessness, but mostly what I'm going to talk about today are people who are experiencing more of that literal homelessness that I was talking about, people on the streets or in shelters. And so HUD, or the U.S. government, has two primary programs that are part of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which are that serve people who are homeless, and those are targeted for people who are homeless. And that's the Continuum of Care program and the Emergency Solutions Grant program. So KHC oversees the Continuum of Care. It's a planning body plus a funding source, so it can get kind of confusing, for the Balance Estate. And our annual funding is this previous fiscal year, which was the most recent competition, was approximately $15 million. You might recall earlier, I talked about there being 400 COCs across the country, and we all have to compete with each other every year for this funding. We're eligible to apply for the same amount we got the previous year, plus a little bit in bonus funding for new projects. But it's not a formula-based project. It's based largely on how we are performing year over year in making progress towards ending homelessness on a variety of different metrics. But this most recent cycle, we got about 15.3 million, and that is for funds about 57 projects, and those project types are there's different ones, but the primary ones are permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. And both of those offer housing assistance. The Rapid Rehousing Program is rental assistance that's provided to tenants, just like a housing choice voucher would be, plus supportive services, but it requires that there be a private landlord willing to take the voucher or for an apartment to be available in the first place. So that's rapid rehousing. And then there's permanent supportive housing, which again is housing assistance plus supportive services for people with disabilities. And those funds can be used in housing that is owned by agencies, but most of the resources are used in the private sector, private landlords. The reason I stress that is because we love this funding. It's extremely important, but the vast majority of it relies on us having willing and available private landlords, which again goes back to Kathy's point of the housing supply gap. Is such a critical piece. HUD could continue to give us more and more money for housing vouchers, which we would love to have, but we have to have the housing on the other side for people to access. And then also under the Continuum of Care program in 2022, HUD found some extra money lying around, and that's not really what happened, but basically they opened up a special competition where they offered money to communities to focus on rural and unsheltered homelessness. And we were one of 60-ish communities that were successful of the 400 in getting funding. And we got about 11.4 million with a 3-year grant term. So this one-time special funding is not necessarily renewable. We don't know yet. But that also provided more rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. But one of the things that we really focused on was street outreach. We had not been able to fund street outreach previously through the Continuum of Care program. And so we've had so many areas across our balanced estate with no outreach and no shelter. And so thanks to this one-time special funding, we have 8 new street outreach programs that cover a full ad district. So 8 districts have special street outreach money. Those are just now coming online. It'll be interesting to see if we are finding even more people experiencing homelessness that we haven't before. The Emergency Solutions Grant Program is a formula-based program, just like the HOME program is. And Kentucky Housing Corporation receives a direct allocation on behalf of the balance of state. And it's approximately, for 2024, it'll be approximately 2.9 million, which is not much. And it funds emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, prevention, and street outreach. So those 4 components of 2.9 million with 118 counties trying to get a little slice of the pie for to help people who are homeless. So we have a competition coming up. We hold a competition every 2 years for our partners to apply to us. And I should have said for Continuum of Care as well, we do not do the direct services. KHC does not. We hold a local competition to make the funds available to partners across the balance estate, like the VOA in KIPTA, for example, received some funding. And then the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, which I'm sure you guys have heard about over the past few years. These funds are not dedicated for people experiencing homelessness, but they can be used to serve people experiencing homelessness. And I want to thank the leadership of KHC for prioritizing people experiencing homelessness as part of the American Rescue Plan over the past few years. Most of the home ARP money has been used and will be used for new development or development projects. Probably shouldn't get too much in the weeds there Terry or Tracy might correct me here, but essentially development projects. But KHC did allocate approximately $1.6 million for street outreach, which has been extremely helpful to get into areas where we did not have that special money. And then also part of the American Rescue Plan is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And that we have, KHC decided to appropriate approximately 17 million over the past few years, and that runs through 2025. And for rental assistance, again, private landlords. But what that ERA money has done is it has allowed us to continue even longer some of the assistance that was provided through COVID. This is COVID relief money, but there was COVID money available through the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. That it stopped at the end of 2024, and we ran out of money before. With this ERA money, we can go even longer, and we're continuing to serve some of the same households that continue to struggle, but that money will go away. And then the last thing is something y'all might not hear about or think about a lot is KHC serves as the public housing authority for 87 counties, administering the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or the Section 8 voucher program, you might refer to it as. But KHC also has a number of special voucher programs that we have been awarded over the years. And one of those is called the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, which was a COVID program. There's about 250 vouchers. Almost all of those are occupied right now. Those are people experiencing homelessness, and they had to be prioritized through our COC. So there was a great partnership between the Housing Contract Administration Department at KHC and the Housing Choice Voucher Program Department. Mainstream vouchers can be used for people experiencing homelessness. And then stability vouchers, KHC received 25. So we're not talking huge numbers here. But the reason I wanted to just point out these voucher programs is we have created, first through the ERA program, and then we've transitioned the funding into the special COC funding that was available. KHC created what we call our Housing Connector program, and that is a staff of 5 that work directly with people experiencing homelessness and our arm of KHC, that's the PHA department, to merge together people experiencing homelessness with those kind of more mainstream housing vouchers to get through the application process, to navigate and mediate with landlords, find the housing, and have some ongoing housing case management as well.
Let me just mainstream. Are you talking what I would have called Olmstead vouchers?
No, this is something different than Olmstead.
Okay.
Mainstream is it is a capital M, capital V, mainstream vouchers, and it's for non-elderly disabled. The Olmstead, I can't remember if you had to be elderly or not, but I believe
no, you just to keep people from institutions.
Yes,
institutionalized.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is different, but it can be used for lots of different populations. So it's not dedicated to homelessness necessarily. But I bring these programs up. I'm sure I'm putting people to sleep. We could have presentations on each one of these individually, but what I wanted to try to reiterate or get across is, sometimes we think about KHC as these separate departments. We've got home ownership over here, and we've got homeless that does ESG and COC and whatever else. But over the past several years, there has been some really good strategic alignment of how resources are being used to help not only people who are low income and need various types of assistance, but also those that are literally experiencing homelessness. And it matters because it helps the people that need the help, but it also matters because HUD, in its funding of continuum of care funding, increasingly is requiring COCs to leverage other resources, healthcare and housing resources, besides just what HUD is paying for through COC or ESG. And they're requiring strategic partnerships. And KHC is so well positioned, since we are administering so many different things, to be able to work together. And it's actually making us more successful and being able to bring more funding in. And it's one of the reasons we were able to bring in, be one of those 60 or so COCs that got that one-time special funding. So kudos to my colleagues in the other departments that were willing to help. So I know I just threw a whole bunch of stuff out there. My contact information's here, and I believe will be sent to you by Sam. And I'm happy to answer all kinds of questions and talk about partners to get them in HMIS up in Northern Kentucky, or demographic questions on the point in time count, or whatever you have on your mind.
Shay, thank you very, very, very much. Are there any other questions for Shay?
Winston, I'd just like to make the comment that I'm really impressed with what Shay's doing, and very appreciative of what you do. You know, here in this community, we have a goal of making sure that there is no one homeless, and I think that should be our goal throughout Kentucky. And I can't believe the work that you are doing, and I just really want you to know that I certainly appreciate what all of you are doing. It is important, and so I just want to make that comment, Winston.
That's great. I appreciate that, Mike. And if there's not any more questions for Shay, I'm going to jump for just a minute or two.
Winston, it looks like Denise has raised her hand.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Hi, Shay. Thanks. I'm Denise with the Attorney General's office.
Filling in trouble.
No, you're not at all. It's really helpful. I did had a question on one of your slides. More curiosity, but I thought it was interesting. You had one on the age of, and I don't think it was the unsheltered. I think it was before that. But what's the reason for that bell curve, or what's the suspected reason of that high point at the 35 to 44, and then the decrease as people without homes decrease, or as that decreases as they age?
That's an excellent question, and I could speculate a lot. I'm trying to think of how to answer this without me.
Can I ask, is it anything to do with life expectancy if you're chronically homeless?
I don't have like data that I can pull down and say that's absolutely what it is. I would think that that's probably an excellent guess. People who are, 45 to 54 and experiencing homelessness are probably in probably have worse health outcomes than people who are housed. So even though they're not in yet an elderly place, age group necessarily, their health circumstances might be worse because they're experiencing homelessness. But I don't know. I think a lot of times what you find is this is based on people offering this type of information. Sometimes people don't have families or friends, mainly families, that they can stay with. Maybe when they're younger, they're more likely to have family supports that are willing to assist them when they're experiencing homelessness. And then the older they get, maybe, I don't want to speak across the board here, so be careful in my thoughts here, but it can be more likely that they've, for lack of a better term, burned bridges, or parents may not be alive anymore, etc. So a lot of people would go to their family if they experience homelessness, and a lot of times people in that kind of mid-range might not have that option anymore. That's just one of my thoughts there.
And also, if you do a pyramid, an age pyramid, and you do it by race and gender, you know how it looks, you know, women, men. In Louisville, what you find is if for Black men, there's an actual indentation that comes back out. So some of these people are getting out of jail at the age of 35 to 44. I mean, if you just do a population pyramid and then you do it by race, it's freaky that there's an indentation that comes back out.
Mm-hmm. But that
would only be one thing, but I'm just saying, I think some of that is how we jail people.
Yeah. So that is a really good observation, Denise. And as we look at the data a little bit more, if something, I mean, this is something we'll be looking at.
Thank you.
Any more?
And that might explain why it's so low, 18 to 24. That's when a lot of people get sent out to. It's just one thing, but it's an actual phenomenon.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I want to take just 1 or 2 minutes to make a few comments about where we stand on the housing supply gap analysis that we've been keeping you informed about over the last several months, since last fall, in fact. As I think each of you should know from the emails that you've received from Wendy Smith and from the bulletins that you've received from the Kentucky Housing Corporation, we have completed phase 1 of that housing supply gap analysis that's been done for us by the Bowen National Research Group, and we reported on that to last week to a very broad audience that was very well received. We had over 200 participants in a virtual video conference in which Mr. Bowen and Wendy went through the high points of the analysis and shared it with everyone. And just to recap very briefly, the phase 1 analysis, which is the analysis of the housing gap as of today, indicates that we have a shortage of at least 206,000 units across the state, which is broken down into about 102,000 rental units, a gap of that many rental units, and a gap of 105,000 of for sale units. And these gaps do exist in almost all income ranges, but of course they predominate in the lower income ranges in both the rental and the initial units for sale, the first time buyer type home. The real unique, one of the real unique things about this gap analysis that we've done is that it's been, all the statistical data is been analyzed and reported on a county by county basis. So if you go to our website and you go to the links that are available there to get into the report, you can determine what the gap is or is analyzed to be in every single county of the 120 counties in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I don't believe we've had data like that available before, and we have sensed that there are a lot of smaller communities that most of us don't think of having a housing gap, that in fact have a housing gap, and the locals know it if they think about it, but it's not been documented in any sort of way. And we hope that the results of this analysis, phase one, raises the awareness of the problem and causes communities all across the state to focus on solutions that may be unique to their particular community. By sometime this summer, late summer probably, we will have the phase two results from our consultant, and the phase two are take into account the recent reports of economic development across the state, the addition of jobs, and all sorts of other demographic factors, and is going to contain a 5-year projection of what that gap will be in the absence of action to modify that in some way. So if you haven't been on that website, we encourage you to do that. Wendy and others continue to enlighten as best we can others in the state and inform others in the state about the results of this housing gap analysis. She has spoken, Mr. Bowden has spoken to the Kentucky League of Cities. We're going to be doing the same thing with the area development districts and many economic development organizations. We've had about a monthly call with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, in which we've initially shared what we were going to do, and now we'll be sharing this data with them. Wendy is in fact speaking today in Eastern Kentucky at a leadership conference there that is interested in this data as so many people and so many organizations are. So there's a lot going on in this area, and we intend for that to continue. And we welcome your thoughts and your comments as we feed down this fight. Excuse me, I have a phone ringing in the background here that I need to put to it, hopefully an end. And with that interruption, Sam, I'll turn the floor back over to you and Mike.
Go ahead, Sam.
I think that's all for our informational items. So, Mr. Chairman, we can move on to the next.
Okay. Well, Winston, just let me say that is a very important study, and I appreciate KHC and the work that they've done on that. And I can understand the interest across the state in that study. So I want to thank KHC and the work that you folks do every day. And Shay, if I could ask you, if you would, I would sure appreciate it if you would send me your slide presentation. I'd like to have that just for future reference, if for nothing else. But it's very informative. And
Mr. Chairman, I will send out the slides to everyone on the call so that you all have access to them.
Good.
I'll also include a link to the housing supply gap website that we've set up. So
okay,
have that.
All right, thank you, Sam. That works. Okay, are there any other items from the board or the staff that anyone would like to bring to the board's attention today? If not, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second.
I'll second, Matt.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.